Greg Katz, you're founder of the Smart Surfaces Coalition. There is a 5-minute video on your website which will explain to people exactly what it's all about and in graphic detail. But can we just begin the conversation by discussing why cities are experiencing global warming perhaps faster than some other parts of the world, what we might severally do with that, and where the coalition fits in. So how did you get involved in all of this? Why are cities important? What's the coalition up to?
Yeah, it's a great question, John. It's great to see you, and thank you for all that you do. I worked in the Clinton administration as Director of Financing for Efficiency and Renewable Energy, and then subsequently was a Managing Director at Good Energies, which is the first large private equity firm investing in clean energy technologies. And it was frustrating to see government policies that were counterproductive, where they would say, we care about these issues, but we refuse to act on them. Mm-hmm. It became clear in writing a book 12 years ago called Greening Our Built World, Cost, Benefits, and Strategies, that the stated intent at the level of a mayor or a city council failed to translate into actual policy and technology. And so one of the results of that failure is that cities have overwhelmingly chosen to cover themselves in dark and impervious surfaces. One of the consequences of adding dark surfaces like dark roofs, dark roads, and dark parking lots is you absorb the large majority of the sun's heat, and that re-radiates at the city level. That's a measurable impact. It's called the urban heat island effect. Yeah. It drives on average about a 9-degree Fahrenheit, 5-degree centigrade increase in summer temperature. That is not equally felt across the city. It's disproportionately experienced in lower income minority areas. Commonly, cities are 12 to 14 degrees hotter in the lowest income parts of the city relative to wealthier parts, which are greener, have more trees, fewer parking lots. And so that breakdown between government intent and actual city policies drove us to create the Smart Surfaces Coalition.
And are we sort of coming back to a discussion that previous generations had? And did they understand the heat island effect, or are we experiencing something significantly new?
Well, it's new in the sense that, you could drive from one end of London to another and you're probably going to take you 2 or 3 hours. So the scale of urban surface transformation means you get compounding heat and pollution and buildup of smog. So the scale has changed. But I think that in a sense, you're pointing to something which is exactly right, which is people intuitively in the past understood that you would design your buildings to respond to challenges of temperature. So you'd have a light colored roof, you would have trees, you'd have gardens, you might have ways to manage water. And unfortunately, this is primarily driven out of the US in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. A new design norm was established and then broadly adopted by cities globally, which is you build boxes, you air condition them, and you sort of engineer your way through challenges like heating and cooling and managing water. So we've gone from a more intuitive, attractive, flexible design that recognizes sun orientation, that recognizes the specifics of where you are in terms of heating degree days, cooling degree days, to a standard box. It is bizarre that most commercial buildings today, for example, the north side of the building, which never gets sun, has exactly the same window treatment as the south side of the building, which is getting sun all day long. And that design failure has had very large consequences, including accelerating climate change, urban misery from excess heat. And that's one of the challenges we're trying to address with the Smart Surfaces Coalition.
Let's explore slightly the history of the coalition. You were saying to me earlier on that the World Cement Association, I think, had recently joined. And when I think about incumbent industries slightly resistant to change, cement and concrete might be quite high up the list. What are you trying to do with the coalition? Who were the early members? Who are the people you're now attracting? Who do you want to attract in future?
I think this science has become, even in the United States, which is pretty split around the validity of science as a basis for policy. Corporations are more reality based, as are mayors. And so there's an overwhelming recognition that science is real and valid and that we're going through accelerating anthropogenic climate change. The World Cement Association looks at climate and says, we want to be part of the solution. A couple ways they do that is increasing reflectivity of surfaces, more porous surfaces, so you manage water better, for example, porous parking lots and roads, and then using cement and urban infrastructure to sequester carbon. And those are three places where the World Cement Association has moved from being defensive to offensive, saying we are going to be creatively engaged in helping to solve this. It's a very smart business strategy, and we're delighted to have the World Cement Association as a partner. The initial work for what was to become the Smart Surfaces Coalition was really to help cities understand the broader costs and benefits. There's a breakdown in the vast majority of cities between stated policy, whether it's around climate, health, or equity, and actual city policies. So the first cities to engage us to help them understand the full sets of costs and benefits were Washington, D.C., our nation's capital. And over time, what we realized is that the sort of structural challenge for cities, which is how to remain livable, how to remain attractive, going into this post-COVID period, was becoming a more urgent issue.
Yeah.
So as an example, the International Downtown Association, which represents downtowns of 600 cities around the world, are under multiple pressures. First of all, COVID means that there's less retail and walking in downtowns. Second is this rapid shift to online digital shopping is a threat to them. And third of all, these downtown areas increasingly are uncomfortable. They're hotter, they're darker, they're more prone to flooding and therefore mold. And particularly the sort of heat smog combination means that what should be an enjoyable experience walking in the great downtowns have become less that way. And so the International Downtown Association, which is a core partner to the Smart Surfaces Coalition, looks at what we're proposing, which is shifting to more reflective, porous, and green surfaces, and says that makes our downtowns more attractive, more appealing. Cities in turn look at downtowns as their core economic engine. That's where much of the revenue comes from. So it's a strategy that solves for multiple problems. What we've been able to show is that that type of strategy has very low marginal costs and very large benefits. You mentioned the Baltimore report. The benefit cost ratio for adopting citywide smart surfaces at Baltimore is about 15-1. The net present value of over $13 billion for a mid-sized city is about $20,000 a person. So the financial benefits, measurable, large, the ability to protect a city from rising threat of heat and climate change is invaluable.
And you've done several cities now, Baltimore being the most recent one. Do they have to open themselves up to you and engage full-heartedly, firstly? And secondly, when you do what you do with them, presumably the level of the analysis has evolved, the level of the benefits to the participating city have evolved. Tell that story.
So cities often don't know things like what percentage of their surface is parking lot, what percent is a steep as opposed to a flat group, what is the albedo of these, that is measure of reflectivity, how much sun is absorbed, how much is reflected. So we use satellite data to get accurate understanding of that. We only work with cities when there's leadership at the mayor or mayor's office level, because it's difficult for us to get some of the needed data that has to be done at the city level. In terms of quantifying benefits, one of our core partners, the American Public Health Association. So we do a lot with leading health and other organizations to quantify benefits in a rigorous way. There are a few dozen cities around the world, London, New York, LA, that have a large enough staff to do this, But for the 99.9% of cities and towns, they simply don't have the staff to do this. So we can step in as a not-for-profit, help them understand, quantify that benefits. We always work with the local on-the-ground organizations. There are 9 NGOs, for example, we worked with in Baltimore, in addition to the city government, city agencies, the members of the city council. So if a city is interested in saying, let's figure out a new direction so that while the world gets hotter, our city gets cooler. If a city is interested in saying there's gross structural inequity between wealthy whiter sections and lower income minority sections, a difference of 10 to 12 degrees Fahrenheit. If we're interested in solving for those kinds of problems, then that city is a great partner for the Smart Surfaces Coalition, because they understand that climate's real. They have a sense of responsibility about making sure the city remains livable. They want to reduce sort of long-term structural risk to the cities. So they want to engage in a way that's holistic. They want to move from piecemeal solutions to something that says, wait, let's think more broadly about reshaping our surfaces in an informed and smart way to make our city healthier, more productive, more competitive. Those are ideal partners, and more cities want to do that. They have the capacity to step back and say, climate's real, we want to do something different, and we're willing to step up and engage in an integrated way.
It's interesting because one of the things that I like about Smart Surfaces as a change agenda and about the coalition and what you're trying to do, your agenda for change, is that I was originally, I think I've told you in the past, trained as a city planner, although I never practiced. But when I was doing my dissertation, I was fascinated by regeneration in cities. And even then that had an economic, a social, an environmental set of dimensions. So in a way, the sustainability agenda was prefigured in urban regeneration projects. But what you're talking about now does all of that in an integrated way, but in a way that would have been almost inconceivable then. And my question is partly going to go across a stepping stone. And the stepping stone is, every so often people get excited about a new idea. And I remember quite some years ago when I was working with Tioxide, which is a titanium dioxide company, or was, they wanted to put titanium dioxide in all surfaces in cities to sort of catalyze breakdown of air pollutants. And I don't think that went anywhere very far. So we get excited and then things don't happen. We're getting excited about smart surfaces now. What gives you the confidence that this time around might be a bit different?
Yeah, it's a great question. Titanium dioxide is very expensive and it has big health problems. But there are a lot of alternative high albedo additives which are now available. So in answer to your question, the reason we think smart surfaces is going to accelerate, and we think become the design norm for all cities and towns, is it's less expensive, it's less risky, it delivers results rapidly, and it addresses a range of what are often thought of as separate issues. So there's city management that cares about, for example, credit risk, the ability to borrow money in bond markets. That's determined by your credit rating. There's a 3-part series on smart surfaces in risk and insurance, leading industry publications, showing how adoption of smart surfaces protects city credit ratings and maintains their ability to borrow cheaply for infrastructure such as water, wastewater treatment, for example. Second is it's a period where people are concerned about jobs, smart surfaces, that is resurfacing roads or putting on PV or planting trees. That's pretty jobs intensive. So if you like jobs, you want to create jobs, this is a check. If you're concerned about climate change, this is a big way to mitigate climate change, to address climate change mitigation and adaptation. So there's a check there as well. If you're concerned about reducing costs to the city in terms of infrastructure costs, replacement costs, this is a smart strategy. In other words, the benefits exceed the costs from year one. If you're concerned about branding, which more and more cities are, come to our city because we have a dynamic young population. We have new parks, we have workforce housing, we have various incentives. The ability to have a city that you can walk in the summer, that you can enjoy, that you can be outdoors, you can be in cafes is becoming increasingly important. Adoption of smart services allows a mayor to say, look, the world's getting hotter, we're on a pathway to getting cooler. That's a very powerful branding story to tell.
Sponge cities were a big thing 4 or 5 years ago, and Zhengzhou, or whichever the city was that was hit, I think has elements of a sponge city to it. Do you rate what the Chinese are doing in that sort of area highly? And do you think there are things that the rest of the world can learn from the sponge city idea?
I don't know China well. I've only been there once. China does many things very well. In my guess is like most cultures, their traditional Chinese design elements that have been replaced by this sort of uniform box design that the Chinese are going back to, the traditional Chinese designs that use landscape in an intelligent way to manage water, and use building design in an intelligent way to manage sun. So one of the, obviously China is a top-down country, and that is a more efficient, a dictator is a more efficient form of government than a democracy. So the ability of China to shift quickly on this issue and adopt smart surfaces and manage their surfaces better to avoid flooding and climate change is powerful. And that lesson, if China does it broadly, would have very broad international implications.
And that overlaps in a way, Greg, with the last question, which was, I could talk all day about this sort of stuff. It's absolutely fascinating. I think the potential is huge, but you're going out now and raising very substantial sums of money to power the coalition and your partners into the future. Firstly, what sort of sums are you trying to raise, and for what sort of activities? And if you dream a bit, you began to get into it about what China might do, but if you dream a bit, what would we be doing collectively in the 2030s that we're not doing now, or possibly unable to imagine doing today?
There's a cartoon character called Pogo. Pogo once said, if it exists, it must be possible. What we're trying to demonstrate is it is possible to make surface design citywide differently than in the past, in an integrated way where you're looking at all the costs and benefits. Our objective is that in a decade from now, that the normal city and town design policies are smart surfaces, not what they are today, which is dark and impervious. If you kind of look at how rapidly good ideas get transmitted and shared across countries, and if you look at how rapidly paradigms shift, for example, solar was viewed as expensive and marginal, but when you look at a Lazard brothers annual update every October and November, it's clear that solar and wind are the lowest cost form of power. The shift to embracing renewables globally has been extraordinarily fast in a historical context, and there are many other examples. So our sense is, once there are proof points and places for which we're raising money to do smart surfaces, India, Europe, South America, United States, once you have a number of cities adopting this approach and quantifying the benefits using satellite data, both to design it and to monitor improvements in health, reductions in temperature, reductions in smog, that this will become a design norm. And our objective, therefore, is in the next decade or so that people switch from stupid surfaces, dark, impervious, lowest first cost, to smart surfaces that have benefits that exceed costs of a ratio of more than 10 to 1, and that can cool cities by between 5 to 8 degrees Fahrenheit, and can cool low-income neighborhoods by 10 degrees, and that can deliver very large climate change mitigation as well as adaptation. That's our vision.
It's been a great pleasure to catch up. So thanks again